The morning sun cast golden rays across London as crowds gathered along the streets leading to Westminster Abbey. People had been waiting since dawn, some even camping overnight, just to catch a glimpse of the royal family on this historic day. The air buzzed with excitement and anticipation. Flags waved in the gentle breeze while cameras clicked constantly, everyone hoping to capture the perfect moment. Inside Kensington Palace, preparations had been underway since the early hours. Kate stood before a full-length mirror, her reflection showing a woman of grace and poise. Her ivory gown, designed by Sarah Burton, featured intricate embroidery that told stories of British heritage through delicate floral patterns. Each stitch had been carefully placed by hand, taking months to complete. The dress flowed elegantly, catching the light with every subtle movement. Her stylist carefully adjusted the final details of her hair, which was styled in a classic updo that showcased the magnificent tiara she would wear. The lover's knot tiara, once worn by Princess Diana, sparkled under the soft lighting of the room. Kate's eyes reflected both the weight of tradition and the joy of the moment. She took a deep breath, steadying herself for the day ahead. In the adjacent rooms, Prince William was being helped into his ceremonial uniform. The deep blue fabric was adorned with medals and honors that represented years of service and dedication. His hands moved automatically through the familiar routine of dressing, but his mind wandered to his children. Today would be a significant moment in their young lives, one they would remember forever. Prince George, the eldest at 10 years old, understood the importance of the day more than his siblings. He had been carefully prepared for this moment, attending several rehearsals and learning about the significance of each ritual. His navy suit was tailored perfectly, making him look like a young gentleman beyond his years. Despite his composure, there was a slight nervousness in his eyes. He wanted to make his parents proud and represent his family with dignity. Princess Charlotte, 8 years old, twirled in her white dress with delicate floral appliques. Her excitement was barely contained as she admired herself in the mirror. Unlike her brother, she seemed completely at ease with the attention and grandeur. Her hair was adorned with small flowers that matched her dress, and she kept touching them gently, making sure everything was perfect. She had been looking forward to this day for weeks, asking countless questions about what would happen and who would be there. Little Prince Louis, only 5 years old, was the most unpredictable member of the family. He bounced around his room with endless energy, his small suit slightly askew despite the nanny's best efforts to keep him neat. He didn't fully grasp why everyone was so serious and formal, but he could sense that something special was happening. His innocent questions and observations brought smiles to everyone around him, lightening the heavy atmosphere of protocol and tradition. As the departure time approached, the family gathered in the main hall of Kensington Palace. William looked at his wife and children with deep pride and love. Kate caught his gaze and smiled, a silent communication passing between them that spoke of shared responsibility and mutual support. They had prepared for this moment together, discussing how to help their children navigate the intense public scrutiny while maintaining some sense of normalcy. The children lined up according to age, just as they had practiced. George stood tall, trying to mirror his father's straight posture. Charlotte positioned herself carefully, remembering all the instructions about how a princess should stand and walk. Louis held his mother's hand tightly, finding comfort in her familiar touch. The household staff stood at attention, witnessing this private moment before the family stepped into the public eye. Outside, the royal convoy waited. The cars gleamed under the morning sun, each one polished to perfection. Security personnel stood at strategic positions, their eyes constantly scanning for any potential issues. The route to Westminster Abbey had been planned meticulously, with every detail considered and contingencies prepared for various scenarios. Kate bent down to speak quietly to Louis, adjusting his collar one last time and whispering words of encouragement. He nodded seriously, trying to show he understood the importance of good behavior. Charlotte linked her arm through George's, and he accepted this gesture of sibling solidarity with a small smile. These small human moments happened away from cameras and crowds, showing the genuine family bonds that existed beneath the royal titles. William checked his watch and nodded to the head of security. It was time to leave. The massive doors of Kensington Palace opened, and the family stepped out into the bright daylight. The waiting photographers erupted into action, their cameras creating a symphony of clicking sounds. But the family maintained their composure, walking with measured steps toward the waiting vehicles. As they settled into the car, Kate helped each child with their seatbelts while William confirmed final details with his aide. The vehicle began to move and the journey to Westminster Abbey commenced. Through the tinted windows, they could see crowds of well-wishers lining the streets. People waved flags, held up signs, and cheered as the convoy passed. The children pressed their faces against the windows, amazed by the sheer number of people who had come to witness this historic day. The drive through London felt both quick and eternal. Every street corner revealed more crowds, more cameras, more expectation. Kate held William's hand and he squeezed it gently, a private acknowledgement of the moment they were sharing. This was more than just a ceremonial event. It was a passage of time, a marking of history, and a glimpse into the future of the monarchy they would one day lead. As Westminster Abbey came into view, its Gothic spires reaching toward the sky, the family prepared for their entrance. This ancient building had witnessed countless royal ceremonies throughout centuries, and today it would add another chapter to its storied history. The car slowed, approaching the designated entrance where dignitaries and officials waited to receive them. The moment they had prepared for was finally here. The convoy came to a gentle stop outside Westminster Abbey, and suddenly everything felt very real. Through the windows, the family could see rows of dignitaries, military personnel standing at attention, and officials in ceremonial robes waiting to greet them. The sound of the crowd swelled, a distant roar of excitement that penetrated even the heavy doors of the vehicle. William stepped out first, his military uniform crisp and commanding. He turned immediately to help Kate, offering his hand as she emerged from the car with practiced grace. Her gown caught the light beautifully, and a collective gasp seemed to ripple through the nearby observers. She smiled warmly, acknowledging the moment while maintaining the dignified composure expected of future queen consort. George followed next, taking a deep breath before stepping onto the red carpet that stretched before them. His young face showed concentration as he remembered every instruction about posture and presentation. An aide stood nearby, ready to assist, but George wanted to prove he could manage independently. He straightened his jacket and took his position, looking every bit the future king despite his tender age. Charlotte practically glided out of the car, her natural confidence shining through. She had been waiting for this moment, imagining it countless times in her mind. The reality exceeded even her vivid imagination. She noticed the flowers decorating the entrance, the elaborate uniforms of the guards, and the magnificent architecture of the abbey rising above them. Her eyes sparkled with genuine delight at the grandeur surrounding her. Louis emerged last, initially hesitant when faced with the overwhelming scene. The noise, the people, the formality of it all made him pause. Kate noticed immediately and bent down, whispering something that made him smile. He nodded bravely and took his place in the family line, determined to be a good boy like his mother had asked. His small hand reached for Charlotte's, and she took it without hesitation, becoming his anchor in this sea of unfamiliarity. The Archbishop of Canterbury approached to offer formal greetings, his ceremonial vestments flowing as he walked. William shook his hand firmly while Kate offered a respectful nod. The Archbishop smiled kindly at the children, understanding that this experience might be overwhelming for such young souls. He spoke a few gentle words to each of them, his grandfatherly manner putting them slightly more at ease. Military bands positioned around the abbey grounds began playing, their music adding to the ceremonial atmosphere. The sound of trumpets, drums, and brass instruments created a powerful symphony that seemed to announce the significance of every moment. George recognized some of the tunes from his history lessons, pieces that had been played at royal ceremonies for generations. Inside the abbey, guests were already seated in carefully arranged sections. World leaders, foreign royalty, members of parliament, and representatives from Commonwealth nations filled the historic space. Everyone had received detailed instructions about protocol, timing, and proper behavior. The air inside was cool despite the warmth outside, and the ancient stone walls seemed to hold centuries of British history within them. The family paused at the entrance for final preparations. Kate's lady-in-waiting appeared with a small bag, checking that everything was perfect. She adjusted a fold in Kate's gown, ensuring it would photograph beautifully and move gracefully as she walked. Charlotte's flower crown received a gentle touch, securing it more firmly. Louis's collar was straightened one more time, though everyone knew it probably wouldn't stay that way for long. William received last-minute updates from his private secretary, whispered information about timing and any changes to the planned schedule. He nodded, absorbing the details while keeping one eye on his children. He wanted them to feel supported, to know that despite the grandeur and formality, their family unit remained strong and connected. Through the massive doors, they could hear the organ beginning to play, its deep, resonant tones filling the abbey with majestic sound. This was the signal that their entrance was imminent. The family exchanged glances, a final moment of private connection before stepping into the most public of spotlights. Kate's hand found William's briefly, a touch that conveyed love, support, and shared purpose. The doors began to open slowly, revealing the spectacular interior of Westminster Abbey. Light streamed through stained glass windows, creating colorful patterns on the stone floor. The congregation rose as one, the sound of hundreds of people standing simultaneously creating a powerful whoosh of movement. All eyes turned toward the entrance, toward the family that represented the future of the British monarchy. George felt his heart beating faster as the reality of the moment hit him. This wasn't a rehearsal anymore. These were real people watching, judging, hoping. He thought of his great-grandmother, Queen Elizabeth II, and how she had carried herself with such dignity throughout her long reign. He wanted to honor her memory, to show that he was learning what it meant to serve. Charlotte squeezed Louis's hand as they prepared to walk forward. She could feel him trembling slightly and wanted him to know she was there. Despite her young age, she understood the importance of family support. They were in this together, all five of them, facing history and expectation as a united front. The processional music swelled as they took their first steps into the abbey. The walk down the long aisle seemed to stretch forever before them. William and Kate led the way, moving with synchronized grace that came from years of public appearances together. Their children followed, each step carefully placed, each moment captured by countless cameras positioned throughout the sacred space. The congregation watched with a mixture of reverence and curiosity. Here was the future of the monarchy, not just in William and Kate, but in their three children who would shape the institution for decades to come. George, the future king, walked with surprising maturity. Charlotte, poised and confident, showed the natural charisma that would serve her well in royal life. And little Louis, trying so hard to be good, represented the humanity and vulnerability that made the royal family relatable. The abbey's interior was breathtaking in its decorated state. Flowers in white, gold, and deep blue created stunning arrangements throughout the space. Banners representing different regions of the United Kingdom hung from ancient columns. The altar area glowed with candlelight, and the throne sat waiting, prepared for the central ceremony that would take place. As they processed down the aisle, Kate noticed familiar faces in the crowd. Foreign royals who had become friends over the years offered subtle nods of support. British aristocracy who had attended their wedding watched with approval. Commonwealth representatives showed respect and interest. Each person present understood they were witnessing a historic moment, a continuation of traditions that stretched back over 1,000 years. William kept his pace steady and measured, aware that his children were matching his steps. He felt enormous pride in how they were handling this pressure. They had practiced, yes, but no amount of rehearsal could fully prepare someone for the actual experience of walking through Westminster Abbey, with the world watching. Yet they persevered, showing the strength and dedication that would be required of them throughout their lives. The family finally reached their designated positions near the front of the abbey. They would sit here, close enough to witness every detail of the ceremony, while remaining slightly apart from the central action. As they settled into their seats, a collective breath seemed to release throughout the building. The entrance had been executed perfectly, with grace and dignity that befitted the occasion. Louis looked up at his mother, seeking reassurance that he had done well. Kate smiled down at him warmly, her eyes conveying pride and love. He relaxed slightly, knowing he had pleased her. Charlotte sat perfectly straight, determined to maintain proper posture throughout the entire ceremony. George's eyes fixed on the throne, understanding that one day, many years from now, his own coronation would take place in this very building. The organ music continued, washing over the assembled guests in waves of sound. The ceremony was about to begin, and the family prepared themselves to witness history unfold before their eyes. The ancient ceremony began with traditional hymns that echoed through Westminster Abbey's vaulted ceilings. The choir's voices blended perfectly, creating harmonies that seemed almost otherworldly. Charlotte found herself mesmerized by the sound, her eyes wide as she tried to identify where all the singers were positioned. The music stirred something deep within her, a connection to history and tradition that she couldn't quite name but definitely felt. George sat with his hands folded in his lap, watching every movement with intense focus. He had studied the order of service extensively, knowing what would happen at each stage. Yet seeing it unfold in reality was entirely different from reading about it in books. The colors, the smells of incense and flowers, the weight of expectation hanging in the air. All of it created an experience that engaged every sense. Louis had started the ceremony with good intentions, but staying still was proving challenging for a 5-year-old. He shifted in his seat, swinging his legs slightly until Charlotte placed a gentle hand on his knee. He stilled immediately, not wanting to disappoint his sister. Kate reached into her small clutch and discreetly handed him a smooth stone she had brought for exactly this purpose, something he could hold and turn over in his hands quietly when he needed to fidget. The Archbishop of Canterbury moved through the ceremony with practiced solemnity, his voice carrying clearly to every corner of the massive space. He spoke of service, duty, and the sacred responsibility of leadership. William listened intently, knowing these words applied not just to the monarch being crowned today but to his own future. He thought about the promises being made, the oaths being sworn, and the tremendous weight of expectation that came with the crown. Kate observed the ceremony while simultaneously keeping awareness of her children. This dual focus had become second nature to her over the years, participating in public events while ensuring her family remained comfortable and composed. She noticed when George's expression became too serious and offered him a small, reassuring smile. She saw Charlotte's growing fatigue disguised behind perfect posture and made a mental note of it. She felt Louis's restlessness and subtly adjusted her position to create a more relaxed space for him. The moment came for the anointing, the most sacred part of the ceremony. A golden canopy was brought forward, creating a private space for this ancient ritual. The congregation fell completely silent, understanding they were witnessing something profound and deeply spiritual. Even Louis seemed to sense the shift in atmosphere, his fidgeting stopping as he watched with curious eyes. George leaned forward slightly, trying to see through the canopy's fabric. His history tutor had explained that this part of the ceremony dated back over 1,000 years, remaining largely unchanged despite the passage of centuries. He wondered what it felt like to receive that blessing, to have holy oil applied while surrounded by the weight of history and the expectations of millions. Someday he would know firsthand, but for now he could only imagine. The choir sang softly during this intimate moment, their voices creating a reverent backdrop. Charlotte found herself humming along quietly. Having heard these hymns during rehearsals and services at church, music had always spoken to her in ways that words sometimes couldn't. She felt the emotion of the moment through the rising and falling melodies, through the harmonies that seemed to lift toward heaven itself. When the canopy was removed, the ceremony continued with the presentation of regalia. Each item, the orb, the scepter, the ring, carried symbolic meaning that had been explained to George in his lessons. He watched as each was presented with solemn ceremony, recognizing some pieces from photographs and portraits he had seen in palace corridors. These weren't just ceremonial objects. They were tangible links to generations of monarchs who had come before. Louis whispered a question to his mother, his voice barely audible. Kate leaned down to answer quietly, explaining what was happening in simple terms he could understand. He nodded seriously, processing this information in his own way. Despite his young age, he was absorbing more than anyone might have expected, creating memories that would last a lifetime. The moment arrived for the actual crowning, and an electric anticipation seemed to charge the air. The St. Edward's crown, heavy with gold and precious stones, was lifted high for all to see before being slowly lowered onto the monarch's head. At that exact moment, bells throughout London began to ring, their joyous clamor announcing the completion of the crowning. Gun salutes fired in the distance, their booming echoes reaching even inside the Abbey's thick walls. George felt goosebumps rise on his arms, overwhelmed by the significance of what he had just witnessed. This was history happening right in front of him, a moment that would be remembered and recorded for future generations. He thought about his own coronation, decades in the future, and wondered what kind of world it would take place in, what challenges he would face, what kind of king he would become. Charlotte felt tears prick her eyes, moved by the beauty and solemnity of the moment. She blinked them away quickly, not wanting anyone to see, but Kate noticed and gave her hand a gentle squeeze. There was no shame in being moved by such an occasion. If anything, it showed sensitivity and understanding of the moment's importance. The congregation erupted in applause, unusual for such a formal ceremony but impossible to contain, given the emotion of the moment. Even within the Abbey's sacred walls, human joy and celebration burst forth. Louis clapped enthusiastically, happy to finally have something active to do. His genuine enthusiasm made several nearby guests smile, a reminder that even the most formal occasions contained moments of simple, authentic joy. The newly crowned monarch processed through the Abbey and everyone stood in respect. William and Kate rose smoothly, and their children followed suit. George stood tall, embodying the dignity expected of his position. Charlotte maintained her perfect posture, though fatigue was beginning to show around her eyes. Louis swayed slightly, and Kate placed a steadying hand on his shoulder. The ceremony continued with prayers and blessings, with readings from scripture and statements of loyalty from various representatives. Each element added layers of meaning and tradition to the occasion. The Dean of Westminster spoke about continuity and change, about honoring the past while embracing the future. His words resonated with William, who understood that balance would define his own eventual reign. Music filled the spaces between spoken words, with the organ thundering magnificently during certain pieces and playing softly during others. The choir demonstrated their skill across a range of styles, from ancient Latin chants to more contemporary compositions written specifically for this occasion. Each musical selection had been chosen carefully to enhance the ceremony's flow and emotional impact. George found himself thinking about his great-grandmother again, imagining her coronation 70 years earlier in this same building. She had been so young, thrust into queenship unexpectedly, yet she had served with grace and dedication for decades. He hoped he would be worthy of that legacy when his time came. Charlotte watched the procession of clergy and officials with fascination. Their robes in various colors, their carefully choreographed movements, the precision with which they carried out each ritual, all of it captivated her attention. She loved pageantry and ceremony, finding beauty in the formality that some might consider stuffy. Louis had reached his limit of sitting still. His body vibrated with barely contained energy, and Kate recognized the signs. She whispered to William, who nodded slightly. They would need to navigate the rest of the ceremony carefully, perhaps allowing Louis a brief moment to stretch if an appropriate opportunity arose. Managing a young child's needs while maintaining royal protocol required creativity and flexibility. The ceremony built toward its conclusion with a final blessing pronounced over the congregation. The Archbishop raised his hands, and his voice carried throughout the Abbey with authority and warmth. Everyone bowed their heads, receiving the benediction with reverence. Even Louis stilled for this moment, sensing its importance through the behavior of everyone around him. As the final notes of the recessional music began, everyone understood that the ceremony had reached its end. What had taken years to plan and hours to execute had created a moment that would resonate through history. The crowned monarch would now process out of the Abbey, followed by other royals and dignitaries in carefully prescribed order. William and Kate prepared their children for their own exit. They would leave soon, returning to their vehicle for the journey to Buckingham Palace, where further celebrations awaited. George straightened his jacket, Charlotte smoothed her dress, and Louis held tightly to his mother's hand. Together, they prepared to face the crowds once more, to fulfill their roles in this historic day. The family knew that their most challenging moment still lay ahead. The appearance on the Buckingham Palace balcony, where they would wave to thousands of well-wishers gathered on the Mall. But for now, they focused on the present moment, on walking out of Westminster Abbey, with the same grace and dignity they had shown upon entering. The family emerged from Westminster Abbey into brilliant sunshine that seemed almost symbolic in its timing. The clouds that had threatened earlier had parted completely, bathing London in golden afternoon light. The crowd's roar was immediate and overwhelming, a wall of sound that hit them with physical force. Thousands upon thousands of people lined the streets, waving flags and cheering with unbridled enthusiasm. George blinked in the sudden brightness, momentarily disoriented by the transition from the Abbey's dim interior to the dazzling outdoor light. He recovered quickly, remembering to smile and maintain proper posture despite his fatigue. The ceremony had lasted over 2 hours, and his young body ached from sitting still for so long. But he pushed through the discomfort, determined to complete his duties without complaint. Charlotte seemed to come alive in the open air, her energy renewed by the crowd's excitement. She waved enthusiastically, her natural charisma shining through. People in the crowd pointed at her specifically, charmed by her confidence and joy. Photographers captured her radiant smile, images that would appear on front pages around the world the next day. She had found her element in this moment, understanding instinctively how to connect with the public. Louis, released from the confines of sitting still, practically bounced down the steps. Kate kept a firm but gentle grip on his hand, guiding him while allowing him some freedom of movement. He waved with his free hand, more interested in the colorful flags and excited faces than in maintaining any particular image. His authentic childishness provided a refreshing contrast to the ceremony's formality, reminding everyone that the royal family contained real people with real personalities. The military precision of the departure was remarkable. Guards stood at perfect attention, their uniforms immaculate, their timing flawless. The royal convoy waited exactly where it should be. Gleaming vehicles positioned with mathematical accuracy, officials and aides moved with practiced efficiency, ensuring every element proceeded according to plan. Yet beneath this choreographed perfection, there was room for spontaneous humanity. William paused to acknowledge the crowd, raising his hand in a wave that generated fresh cheers. He had learned from his grandmother that these small gestures mattered enormously to people, taking an extra moment to connect, to show appreciation for those who had waited hours just to catch a glimpse. This was part of modern monarchy's evolution. Service meant being present, being grateful, being human. Kate noticed an elderly woman in the front row of the crowd, tears streaming down her face as she waved a small Union Jack flag. Their eyes met briefly, and Kate offered a warm smile specifically directed at her. The woman clutched her flag to her chest, overcome with emotion. These individual connections, though fleeting, created bonds between the monarchy and the people it served. The children were guided toward their vehicle, but not before one final wave to the assembled crowd. George raised his hand in a gesture that mimicked his father's, already learning the mannerisms of royal life. Charlotte blew a kiss, delighting the onlookers. Louis waved both hands wildly, his enthusiasm uncontainable. Each child contributed their unique personality to this public moment. Inside the car, the family finally had a brief respite from public scrutiny. Louis immediately slumped against his mother, exhausted by the effort of good behavior. Kate stroked his hair gently, proud of how well he had managed such a challenging day. Charlotte removed her flower crown carefully, placing it on the seat beside her with reverence. She remained quiet, processing everything she had experienced. George stared out the window at the passing crowds, his expression thoughtful beyond his years. William recognized that his son was absorbing lessons, forming understanding about duty and service that would shape his future. He wanted to say something profound, something that would help George make sense of the enormous responsibility that would one day be his. But sometimes silence communicated more than words ever could. The convoy moved through London's streets at a stately pace, allowing people lining the route to see the royal family. Every window was filled with waving hands and smiling faces. Building facades had been decorated with banners and bunting. Street vendors sold commemorative items while children perched on their parents' shoulders for better views. The entire city had transformed into a celebration of monarchy and national identity. Kate looked at William, and they shared a moment of wordless communication that came from years of partnership. They had successfully guided their children through an intensely challenging experience. The day wasn't over yet, or the balcony appearance still awaited her, but they had cleared the highest hurdles. Their children had represented the family with grace and authenticity. The journey from Westminster Abbey to Buckingham Palace typically took 15 minutes, but today's processional route had been designed to maximize public viewing opportunities. The convoy wound through neighborhoods where people had gathered in incredible numbers. Some held homemade signs with messages of support and celebration. Others simply stood quietly, witnessing history with their presence. Louis had recovered some energy and pressed his face against the window, fascinated by the passing scenes. He asked questions in rapid succession, his curiosity overcoming his tiredness. Why were so many people here? Where did they all come from? Could they see him in the car? Kate answered each question patiently, explaining in simple terms that people had come to celebrate an important day for the country. Charlotte reopened her small clutch bag and pulled out a compact mirror, checking her appearance with the seriousness of someone twice her age. Her hair had stayed perfectly in place despite hours of wear. Her dress, though slightly wrinkled from sitting, still looked beautiful. She wanted to be camera-ready for the balcony appearance, understanding that photographs from that moment would be seen by millions. George continued his observation of the crowds, but now he was also thinking about the future. When his own coronation eventually happened, what would the world look like? Would people still gather in streets, or would technology have changed how such events were experienced? Would the monarchy itself remain relevant, or would he need to help reinvent it for a new generation? These were heavy questions for a 10-year-old, but his position demanded a different kind of childhood than most children experienced. The convoy passed through Admiralty Arch, that grand gateway that marked the transition to the Mall. Here the crowds reached their peak density. People packed shoulder to shoulder as far as the eye could see. The noise level increased dramatically, cheers and music and celebration creating an overwhelming soundscape. Red, white, and blue dominated the visual field, with Union Jacks waving in an endless sea of patriotic fervor. William felt the weight of the moment settling on his shoulders. Soon they would stand on that famous balcony, representing continuity with the past and hope for the future. His children would wave to these crowds, their images broadcast to billions around the world. Every gesture would be analyzed, every expression interpreted. The pressure was immense, yet this was the life they had been born into. Buckingham Palace came into view, its familiar facade decorated elaborately for the occasion. Fresh flowers adorned every available space. The Victoria Memorial gleamed in the sunshine, its golden figures seeming to bless the day's events. The gate stood open, revealing the courtyard where the family would alight before making their way to the balcony. The car rolled through the gates, and suddenly the exterior noise dimmed slightly, muffled by the palace's massive structure. Staff members waited in the courtyard, ready to assist with any final preparations. The children would have moments to freshen up, to gather themselves before facing the crowds one more time. But there was no real rest yet. The most public moment of the entire day still lay ahead. Kate helped Louis out of the car, steadying him as he found his footing. Charlotte emerged with practiced grace, once again the picture of perfect poise. George exited last, taking a moment to straighten his jacket and compose himself. William stood beside them, placing a hand on George's shoulder in a gesture of support and pride. They entered the palace through a side entrance, walking quickly through corridors where staff nodded respectfully as they passed. The family had been in these passages countless times, yet today everything felt different. History had been made this day and they had played their part. But their role wasn't quite finished. In a private room near the balcony access, final preparations took place. Hair was checked, clothing adjusted, and last instructions given. The children received encouragement and reminders about what would happen next. They would step onto the balcony, wave to the crowd, and possibly witness a flypast by the Royal Air Force if weather conditions permitted. It would be loud, overwhelming, and magnificent. Louis asked if he could have something to eat, his practical concerns cutting through the ceremonial grandeur.
Kate produced a small snack she had wisely packed, letting him eat quickly before they proceeded.
Charlotte sipped water carefully, not wanting to risk spilling anything on her dress. George simply stood quietly, gathering his internal resources for one final public appearance. The sound of the crowd outside penetrated even the palace's thick walls. Hundreds of thousands of people filled the mall, waiting patiently. The doors to the balcony opened and the sound hit them like a physical force. The roar of hundreds of thousands of voices created a wave of noise that seemed to vibrate through their very bones. For a moment, the family stood frozen in the doorway, overwhelmed by the sheer magnitude of the crowd stretched before them. The mall was a sea of humanity, flags waving like colorful waves on an ocean of celebration. William stepped forward first, his hand raised in greeting. The crowd's response intensified impossibly, their cheers reaching new heights of enthusiasm. He moved to his designated position on the balcony, making room for the rest of his family to join him. Kate followed, her radiant smile genuine despite her exhaustion. She had perfected the art of appearing fresh and engaged even after hours of demanding public appearances. George emerged onto the balcony with measured steps, acutely aware that millions of eyes were focused on him. His heart pounded, but he kept his expression calm and pleasant. He positioned himself beside his father, standing slightly behind as protocol dictated. From this vantage point, he could see the full scope of the gathering hour, people filling every available space, climbing on monuments for better views, perched in trees, standing on walls. The devotion and enthusiasm were staggering. Charlotte practically glowed as she stepped into view, her natural comfort with attention serving her well. She waved enthusiastically, and the crowd responded with particular affection. Her youthful energy and obvious joy made her immediately relatable to the masses below. Photographers captured her beaming face, creating images that would become iconic representations of the day. Louis bounded onto the balcony with unrestrained excitement, momentarily forgetting all the instructions about decorum. The crowd loved it, their cheers becoming tinged with laughter at his authentic childish enthusiasm. Kate gently guided him to his spot, but she didn't suppress his energy entirely. His genuine reactions provided the perfect counterbalance to the ceremony's formality, reminding everyone that the royal family contained real, spontaneous human beings. The family stood together, united in this moment of public connection. William placed his hand on George's shoulder, a gesture captured by thousands of cameras. Kate held Louis's hand while Charlotte stood independently, confident in her ability to manage the situation. They waved in unison, acknowledging different sections of the crowd, ensuring everyone felt included in this shared experience. The noise was relentless but joyful, a celebration of tradition, continuity, and national identity. People shouted congratulations, declarations of loyalty, and simple expressions of happiness. Some waved British flags while others held flags from Commonwealth nations, representing the global reach of the monarchy. The diversity of the crowd reflected modern Britain arose different ages, backgrounds, and ethnicities united in this historic moment. George scanned the crowd, trying to comprehend its vastness. His lessons had taught him about population numbers and crowd sizes, but abstract numbers couldn't capture the reality of seeing this many people gathered in one place. Each person had made the effort to be here, had considered this event important enough to dedicate their day to it. That collective choice carried profound meaning about the monarchy's continuing relevance. Charlotte noticed cameras positioned on nearby buildings and rooftops. Their large lenses pointed directly at the balcony. She understood her image was being transmitted worldwide in real time. People in distant countries were watching her wave, seeing her smile, forming impressions of the future of the British royal family. Instead of feeling intimidated, she felt energized by the responsibility. Louis grew tired of waving with just one hand and started using both, his arms moving with windmill enthusiasm. The crowd ate it up, their laughter and cheers encouraging his antics. Kate allowed him this freedom, recognizing that his authentic behavior actually enhanced the family's connection with the public. Controlled perfection could create distance. Genuine moments created bonds. Minutes passed as the family remained on the balcony, giving the crowd adequate time to see them, photograph them, and feel connected to the celebration. William occasionally leaned down to speak quietly to George, pointing out different sections of the crowd or making observations. These father-son moments, though private in content, occurred in the most public of settings, a paradox that defined royal life. Kate engaged Charlotte in conversation, using the opportunity to check how she was feeling. Charlotte assured her mother she was fine, even energized by the crowd's enthusiasm. She loved being part of something larger than herself, contributing to a tradition that stretched back centuries. Unlike some children who might feel overwhelmed by such attention, Charlotte seemed to flourish under it. Suddenly, a distant rumble caught everyone's attention. The sound grew gradually louder, and experienced members of the crowd recognized it immediately. The Royal Air Force flypast was approaching. Excitement rippled through the masses as people craned their necks skyward, searching for the first glimpse of aircraft. The timing had been coordinated precisely, weather conditions had cooperated, and now they would witness a spectacular aerial display. The family on the balcony also looked upward, anticipation building. Louis bounced excitedly, having been told about the planes, but not quite understanding what to expect. George's eyes widened as the first aircraft appeared in the distance, their formation perfect, their approach dramatic. Charlotte clapped her hands together, her delight unfiltered and infectious. The aircraft swept overhead in waves, different types representing various branches of military aviation. Historic planes flew alongside cutting-edge fighters, symbolizing the RAF's proud history and modern capabilities. The noise was tremendous, the power of their engines creating vibrations that could be felt in the chest. Louis covered his ears but remained transfixed, his mouth forming a perfect O of amazement. Red, white, and blue smoke trailed behind the final squadron, painting the sky with patriotic colors. The visual effect was stunning against the clear blue backdrop, creating a living flag that stretched across London's skyline. The crowd erupted in fresh cheers, their voices competing with the aircraft engines. Cameras clicked furiously, everyone wanting to capture this spectacular moment. George watched with particular interest, knowing that military service formed an important part of royal tradition. His father had served as a search and rescue pilot, his grandfather had flown helicopters, and generations of royals had maintained connections with the armed forces. Seeing this display reminded him that being royal meant understanding and honoring those who served the nation in various capacities. The planes completed their pass and disappeared into the distance, but their impact lingered. The colored smoke slowly dissipated, and the crowd's energy remained high. The family waved with renewed enthusiasm, feeding off the collective excitement. Louis had found new energy, apparently no longer tired despite his long day. Charlotte's cheeks were flushed with happiness, her smile brilliant and genuine. William looked at Kate, and they shared a moment of profound satisfaction. They had successfully navigated an incredibly demanding day, while keeping their children comfortable, engaged, and appropriately behaved. The family's appearance had been dignified yet accessible, formal yet human. They had struck the delicate balance that modern monarchy required, honoring tradition while remaining relatable. The time came to withdraw from the balcony. They couldn't remain indefinitely despite the crowd's obvious desire for more. The family took one final moment to wave, putting extra energy into this last gesture. George waved with both hands for the first time, matching his younger brother's enthusiasm. Charlotte blew kisses, her theatrical flair perfectly suited to the moment. Louis jumped up and down while waving, his exhaustion temporarily forgotten. Then, as choreographed, they turned and walked back through the balcony doors into the palace's interior. The doors closed behind them, muffling the crowd's sound but not eliminating it entirely. The roar continued outside, people reluctant to disperse despite the royal family's departure. They remained on the mall, celebrating among themselves, sharing the experience of having witnessed history. Inside, the family finally allowed themselves to truly relax. George loosened his collar slightly, relief evident on his face. Charlotte kicked off her shoes, sighing with contentment. Louis immediately asked if they could watch the flypast again, not understanding it was a one-time event. William removed his jacket and Kate let down her hair, the formal appearance no longer necessary in this private space. They gathered in a comfortable sitting room, just the five of them, processing what they had experienced. Staff brought refreshments, war tea for the adults, juice and biscuits for the children. Louis attacked the biscuits with enthusiasm, his appetite returning now that duties were complete. Charlotte nibbled more delicately, though she was clearly hungry as well. George took a sandwich but ate slowly, still somewhat in his formal mindset. William pulled George aside for a private word, wanting to acknowledge his son's exemplary behavior. George had carried himself with maturity far beyond his years, understanding the weight of his position without being crushed by it. William's pride was profound. His son would make a fine king someday, of that he was certain. Kate wrapped Charlotte in a hug. Evening descended on London, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. The city continued its celebration, but the intensity had mellowed into something more reflective. Inside Buckingham Palace, the family prepared for the final event of the day, a formal reception with dignitaries and honored guests. Yet even as they readied themselves for more public appearance, their energy had shifted. The hardest parts were behind them, and what remained was more relaxed, almost celebratory in nature. Kate helped Charlotte change into a fresh dress, this one slightly less formal, but still appropriate for an evening reception. Charlotte had insisted on doing her own hair this time, wanting to prove her independence. She worked carefully with the brush, creating a simple but elegant style that made her look slightly older. Kate watched with a mixture of pride and wistfulness, recognizing these small signs that her daughter was growing up faster than she sometimes wished. George had changed into a dinner jacket that made him look remarkably grown up. He stood before the mirror, adjusting his bow tie with the concentration of someone learning a complex skill. William appeared behind him, offering guidance on getting the tie perfectly straight. This moment of father teaching son contained within it all the other lessons that would pass between them over the coming years. Lessons about duty, leadership, and the peculiar burden of being born to serve. Louis had fallen asleep briefly during their rest period, and waking him had been challenging. He was cranky and disoriented, not unusual for a tired 5-year-old who had endured an extraordinarily long day. Kate was patient, using humor and gentle encouragement to help him navigate his bad mood. She changed him into comfortable evening clothes, prioritizing his comfort over absolute formality. He wouldn't be required to stay at the reception. Longer arrangements had been made for him to retire early if needed. The reception itself took place in the palace's grandest rooms, spaces decorated with priceless art and furniture that had witnessed centuries of royal history. Guests mingled beneath crystal chandeliers, their conversations creating a sophisticated murmur that filled the elegant spaces. World leaders, military officials, Commonwealth representatives, and cultural figures had gathered to mark the historic day and look toward the future. William and Kate worked the room with practiced skill, spending a few moments with each guest or group, making everyone feel valued and heard. They had perfected this art over years of public service, the ability to be fully present for brief interactions, to make genuine connections despite time constraints, to remember names and previous conversations. George accompanied them, observing how his parents balanced warmth with dignity, accessibility with appropriate distance. Charlotte charmed everyone she encountered, her natural social abilities evident even at her young age. She asked thoughtful questions and listened attentively to responses, demonstrating that she was being raised to value substance over superficiality. Guests were universally impressed by her poise and intelligence, recognizing that the monarchy would be in capable hands with this generation. Louis lasted about 30 minutes before his exhaustion became impossible to hide. A trusted nanny appeared as prearranged, ready to escort him to the nursery where he could properly rest. He went without complaint, too tired to protest. As he left, he waved sleepily to his parents, who blew him kisses in return. His departure went largely unnoticed by the guests, which was exactly as planned. The focus remained on the celebration rather than on any individual's departure. The evening progressed with speeches and toasts, with musical performances and moments of formal ceremony, yet the atmosphere remained more relaxed than the day's earlier events, people savoring the opportunity to reflect on what they had witnessed. Conversations turned to the ceremony's most moving moments, the children's excellent behavior, and the crowd's extraordinary enthusiasm. George found himself talking with a young Commonwealth representative, who shared stories about his home country and its relationship with the monarchy. George listened with genuine interest, asking questions that showed he understood the complexity of Britain's role in the modern world. This young man represented a nation that had gained independence decades ago, but chose to maintain ties through the Commonwealth. Understanding that choice, respecting those who made it, and honoring the relationships built over centuries. These were lessons George needed to absorb. Charlotte eventually tired as well, her earlier energy depleted by the long day. Kate noticed her daughter's subtle signs of exhaustion. The way her smile became slightly fixed, how she leaned more heavily when standing still. She made arrangements for Charlotte to retire, and though Charlotte initially protested, she ultimately accepted that she needed rest. Kate walked her daughter to her room personally, using the opportunity for private conversation about the day's experiences. Alone in her bedroom, Charlotte sat on her bed and reviewed everything that had happened. The beautiful clothes, the magnificent music, the crowds of cheering people, the spectacular fly pasta. All of it swirled in her mind like scenes from a grand production. But she also thought about the responsibilities that came with these privileges, the expectations that would follow her throughout life. Her mother had explained that being royal meant serving others, not just enjoying ceremony. Charlotte was beginning to understand what that truly meant. Back at the reception, William and Kate continued their duties, but they too were counting down until they could retire. George remained with them, determined to stay until the very end despite his tiredness. He saw this as another lesson in endurance, another example of putting duty before personal comfort. His parents noticed his determination and were both proud and slightly concerned. They didn't want him to lose his childhood to royal obligation. Yet they recognized his sense of responsibility was intrinsic to his character. The reception eventually wound down, guests departing with warm farewells and expressions of gratitude for the invitation. The grand room slowly emptied, staff efficiently beginning the process of clearing and resetting spaces. The family was finally truly free to retire for the evening. They walked together through the palace corridors, their formal shoes clicking on polished floors, their voices echoing in the vast spaces. In their private quarters, away from all cameras and observers, they gathered one final time as a family. Louis was already asleep, peaceful in his bed. Charlotte was reading quietly, unwilling to sleep despite her exhaustion. She wanted to hold on to the day a bit longer, to process everything before letting sleep wash it into memory. When her parents checked on her, she asked if she could stay up a little longer, and they agreed, understanding her need for this quiet reflection. William, Kate, and George sat together in their private sitting room, finally able to speak freely without concern for being overheard or observed. They reviewed the day's events, laughing about small mishaps that the public never saw, marveling at moments that had exceeded expectations. George asked questions about things he had observed, seeking to understand the deeper meaning behind ceremonial actions. William shared stories from his own childhood experiences at royal events, helping George see continuity across generations. He spoke honestly about the challenges of growing up royal, the pressure of constant scrutiny, the difficulty of maintaining normalcy while fulfilling extraordinary obligations. But he also emphasized the privileges and opportunities, the ability to make a positive impact, the honor of serving something greater than oneself. Kate listened, occasionally adding her own perspective as someone who had married into the royal family rather than being born into it. She offered George the valuable viewpoint of an outsider who had learned to navigate this complex world. Her experiences provided reassurance that adaptation was possible, that maintaining one's authentic self while fulfilling royal duties wasn't contradictory. As the conversation continued, George began to relax, letting go of the formal posture he had maintained all day. His questions became more philosophical, touching on matters of purpose and identity. Why did the monarchy still exist? What made it relevant? How could he be sure he would serve well when his time came? These weren't questions with simple answers, but his parents engaged thoughtfully, respecting his need to grapple with these profound issues. Eventually, Kate suggested they should all get some rest. Tomorrow would bring newspaper coverage to review, perhaps some official photographs to approve, and certainly more public interest. But compared to today, it would be manageable. George hugged both parents goodnight, holding on slightly longer than usual, needing that physical reassurance of their love and support. Alone in his room, George changed into pajamas and climbed into bed. He replayed the day in his mind of the walk down the Abbey's aisle, the weight of history in that sacred space, the roar of the crowds, the magnificent fly past. He thought about his siblings and how they had each contributed to the day's success in their own ways. He felt gratitude for his family, their unity and mutual support. In their bedroom, William and Kate finally had complete privacy. They changed out of their formal clothes, the relief of removing restrictive garments immediate and welcome. Kate sat at her dressing table, removing jewelry and beginning the process of taking down her elaborate hairstyle.
Willie,